Battlefield Podcast.
Hey everybody, it's Ola aka Chalk1 from Battlefield Podcast, here to talk to you a little bit about our first impressions of Battlefield Hardline, the beta that came out today, hot off the heels of the release press conference type deal that they held at E3. With me is Tony aka Why Not the Tiger, and we had the chance to be one of the lucky ones that got to actually get into the beta today because there was such a demand for it. First the site couldn't handle it, and then the registration system wasn't working right, and people weren't getting stuff when they should have or thought they should have. Bit of a misstep for the launch of that. But having said that, Tony, you and I got a chance to play probably about 2 hours or so across the two different game modes on the same map that's in the beta. I know that you and I share the same sentiment on that, so we both got into this sort of, I guess, with an open mind, right? You and I had talked before that we didn't want to form too much of an opinion of Hardline until we could actually play it.
That's pretty much been my own personal opinion, especially with all the negativity surrounding Hardline from its announcement, or it's from its leak last week. So like you said, I went in trying to just keep a complete open mind.
And there was a lot of negativity at first. People were, saying it's not a Battlefield game, it's too different, whatnot. The game modes are different. It doesn't feel like just the same old thing. It's actually quite enjoyable for me. But it still feels like a Battlefield game. Like for anybody who's played Battlefield 3 or 4, you jump into that, you're instantly familiar with what's going on.
I agree. Definitely.
So the map that's included, there's just one map in the beta. It's called High Tension. And then there's two game modes. There's Blood Money and Heist. And both of those modes are really nothing like anything the Battlefield franchise has seen. What did you think of the game modes so far, like what the experience that we had?
Well, to be honest, I'll echo your sentiments because they were so unlike what we're used to seeing. And like you said, it was really refreshing. And more than that, it was a stress-free environment. That was nice in itself, just because I think no matter what we say, we can't help but have prior Battlefield experiences floating in the back of our minds. So for me, it was a weight off my shoulders that I was having a lot more fun than I had expected. I kind of, as much as I went in with an open mind, there was something in the back of my mind going, you know what, I'm prepared for this to be bad.
Yeah. And
so when the game modes were so different from what we're used to, and like I was talking about earlier with you, is that what was cool about them is that they weren't just those typical game modes that we've seen rehashed in shooters like Conquest and Domination are essentially the same thing, just on like Domination's on a smaller scale. I mean, even Rush is essentially the same thing when you break it down, but it's not a TDM. It's just they're centered around crime and what cops and robbers do, and I thought that was cool. Like it was just so different, and just some of the aspects. Do you want to give away some of the game modes?
So why don't we talk about Blood Money? That's the one that we played first, right? Which is basically, again, the teams are always the same, but in that one, the goal is to reach a total of, I think it was $5 million accumulated for your team. Each team has its home vault, and then in the middle of the map is a money pile. That's basically just what was it, like an ATM that was falling over or something?
It was a big crate of money.
Right. So the idea is you go there, you pick up money, you bring it to your vault until you accumulate, whatever team gets to $5 million first wins. But there's so many different variables to that because you can steal money from the opposing team's vault. You mentioned earlier, it's great that it doesn't just bank that money, like it's there and you actually have to keep that $5 million until you get there. So just because you have 4.5, somebody can now go there, and I think you can carry up to 500,000 at a time. So people can pretty quickly steal money from your own vault. I thought that game was really interesting. It was very fresh. It was a lot of fun once we got the hang of it. And just, the usual stuff, new map and figuring out how things work. And some of the mechanics are slightly different, but I had a shit ton of fun playing that.
I did too. And basically, I think what the best part of the game mode is that there's not one way to attack it. So like we saw different tactics, like guys would either camp our armored vehicle and wait for us to deposit money in our armored vehicle, or they would camp the money pit super hard. But the problem is always if you put your forces either on our armored car or on the money pit, that means you don't have forces guarding your or the enemy they don't have forces guarding their own armored car. So if you can't get money from the pit, then you just go take it right from their stash. So it's super cool that it just doesn't bank it and then it's gone. You're like, okay, they've got 4 million, we've got 1. Let's go and raid their stuff and force them out from our spawn or from our vault to defend their stuff. So it's nice that it makes it a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more fluid. It's not just like, let's set up the spawn trap and let's kill them while they're in the spawn. They have this reactionary. You have to react to what the other team's doing.
Now, we played, those were 32-player servers, so it wasn't quite as crazy or too busy, but I can see a lot of strategies come into play in that kind of game mode where, you can make a big difference with a squad of people, because if you think about it, a squad of 5 can carry 2.5 million. That's half of what you need.
Yeah.
And when you take that from the enemy team, you double your gain, right? So you gain 2.5 million, they lose that. So it was always a back and forth of, we're so close, and then you're just trying to get the last bit of cash that you need to get, and you hear the game announce that your own vault's being raided, and you're like, crap, man, we gotta go back and stuff like that. So then the other game mode was called Heist that we played, and that one, when you first get into it, you're kind of like, what's going on here? Because it's not quite as obvious, but it's basically the police's job is to prevent the criminals from blowing up and stealing basically a bag of money from 2 separate armored trucks that have crashed, I guess. And that's sort of scripted on the map. Mm-hmm. And it's a whole different experience. It's almost a little bit more like a Rush type of game mode, except that even when the criminals blow open the armored truck, they still have to take that bag of money and head to one of 2 escape points to actually score.
And that's something that the trailer doesn't do a good job of showing, because the trailers, they show just sort of this like mobile action. You're like, okay, I don't know if this is going to be a lot of fun. But it's interesting how the fight goes from being contained and fighting over this one point, this one piece of this one armored vehicle or whatever that is being raided. And if they happen to pick the money up, suddenly it does become a mobile fight, but it can become a static fight again when they're trying to deposit it later on. But then it all repeats itself because they have to go back for the second one as well. So it's really interesting that you have this like ebbs and flows, and it's not one-sided. That's what was really interesting, is like it wasn't necessarily like, okay, it's easy for the police to defend, because we were on both sides and we actually had a pretty easy time on both sides. So one team or the other didn't have any sort of advantage over the other team.
And it's basically a mix of Rush turning into Capture the Flag, because when you have the money that you have to bring to the escape point, if you lose it, if you drop it, the other team just has to stay around it for a while to return it back to the armored car. Mm-hmm. What did you think in general of the way that the game played? 2 hours, we didn't get a whole lot of experience with different weapons and all that stuff, but let's talk a little bit about experience with vehicles and just sort of the gameplay in general.
Well, as a guy that's not necessarily a PC shooter player, I took to it relatively quickly, and especially the driving. The driving I was a little worried about, and I didn't jump into a helicopter because I knew I'd end up crashing it, but I'll give it a go eventually. But the driving was really easy. It was really easy to pick up. Just being like a former PC shooter player, I just knocked off the rust really easily. Mm-hmm. But mechanically, like, it reminds me of playing Battlefield 4 from the PC. Like, it just the way the guns handle, like all the expectations, you can take everything you know from Battlefield 4 and incorporate it into Hardline, with the exception of like the AK-74 or the AK-47 or whatever version they have as the AK. That weapon has like a shit ton of recoil. It's amazing. They're like, whoa, okay, I don't like that at all. So the actually how it plays it's so familiar, and I think some people might find that to be something to complain about, but I like it. It's easy to pick up. You're like, okay, cool, this is familiar. I don't have to learn much. I mean, what you're learning is sort of the intricacies of how you set your character's loadout up, and how you use some of these new sort of in-game perks, like the ballistic vest or whatever.
Yeah, there's some of those things, right? And some of the new gadgets that are in this game that we haven't seen before. There's a self revive gadget, so to speak. It's basically like an EpiPen or something, or a shot of adrenaline. But you're right. It's almost a really good mix of familiar and different enough and entertaining enough. I mean, we were laughing a lot. Like, I remember the first time you saw me running and I had like money coming out of the back of the giant bag I was carrying. It's funny, and there's small details too. Like, I noticed just in playing that when you're taking money from the money pile or from the other team's vault, it takes a while. It's a similar mechanic to arming an MCOM. So you hold down the button and you wait for the circle to move around. That happens more quickly when there's more of your teammates around there with you. You do it by yourself, it takes a while. It's almost like capturing a flag, right? Like that time goes by faster if there's more of you. There's some cool stuff. There's some different melee takedowns. There's a taser in the game, which I've yet to try. But I saw somebody get shot with it, which was funny. There's this weird interrogation thing where if you melee somebody and you're the police, you can interrogate the criminal. Basically, it will reveal the enemy players on the minimap.
When it happens, you hear on your side that somebody talked. It's like this very criminal-esque, like, oh man, he talked or whatever. And then you know that all you guys are lit up on radar. So it's not just like something that happens and you don't know that it happens. Like, you know that suddenly you're on radar. So you get a little bit more guarded with your movement and you're kind of looking around a little bit more. I think the one thing everyone's probably wondering about is like the netcode. Like, did you see or did you feel any sort of the Battlefield 4 netcode sort of creeping in on Hardline?
Not particularly, but I don't actually experience that many issues with netcode in Battlefield 4 either. There was a couple trades that I had, but I don't think I ever got shot where I felt like it wasn't warranted or I didn't know what was going on. I'm actually encouraged that they open up the beta this early, even though from what I understand, it will only be open for a couple of weeks, but I think that's probably a good sign because we all know that the BF4 beta wasn't a true beta. It was basically a demo. Yeah. There weren't going to be any changes made, whereas in this case, the forums and Battlelog are already filled with suggestions from people, and if Visceral reads those and makes adjustments accordingly, that spells good future, hopefully, for this game. I don't know, all in all, I thought that the rounds were quicker as well. That's one thing I liked when I started playing Titanfall, for example. It's just that things didn't drag out as long as a lot of Battlefield 4 rounds tend to do. It was fast-paced. It was enjoyable, but the best advice I can give to people is to try it out themselves. Now, I know there's a lot of frustration about getting into the beta and how that's been handled. The sites was down, and then it looked like you were going to get in, and then it told you you'd get an email, and people haven't gotten emails, and now you can still sign up, but they said on Twitter that they're not accepting any new ones today.
Yeah, especially if you've got friends who are playing in the beta and you want to play with them, but you can't because you're locked out of the beta right now.
And especially because it was happening during the day, and a lot of people are at work and just don't have the opportunity to sign up. They made a big deal out of it on stage at E3, saying the beta is open now, go sign up and play the game. And then when people don't get to, of course, they'll be disappointed, so I understand that. I had more fun than I had anticipated. The very first round that I loaded in, I was going kind of like, oh, this feels a little odd. Things just, the movement feels different. The player movement. It feels slower, more sluggish in some way. I don't exactly know how to describe it, but it feels a little off.
I would pretty much say the same thing, just kind of like what we talked about earlier. Just kind of go in and have an open mind and try not to bring your preconceptions into the experience and just play it for what it is and not what you expect it to be. And I think you might have a good time, because if you expect it to be like Battlefield or completely not like or dissimilar from Battlefield, then you're going to be disappointed, because it is very much like Battlefield, but at the same time it's different enough where you're getting a whole new experience. So just go in with an open mind. I think you'll find you're going to like it.
Yeah, and let us know in the comments what you think if you've been able to play the beta. We'll have another more detailed video about Hardline sometime later this week or early next, after we've had a couple more hours to actually play with us. This was just a very early first impressions, couple of early thoughts video. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.